What's going on, YouTube? Uberman here. I've got Harry Campbell here today, and we're going to talk about his recent trip to New York City and the rideshare industry out there. How you doing today, Harry?
I'm doing well, Randy. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Hey, no problem. Thank you for being here. So I heard you recently took a trip to New York City, and I'm sure other people as well as myself are really interested in what the rideshare industry is like out there.
Definitely. Well, so I did spend a week in New York, and did took a bunch of meetings with some people there. Talked to a couple reporters that were out there, met with a couple of the companies out there, and then of course took a bunch of rides with the services themselves, and even just public transportation, walking around because I think New York is pretty atypical transportation market, but at the same time, it's actually one of the biggest markets in the entire country. So I figured that there's definitely a lot in there that we can probably talk about and go over.
Okay, well, you want to talk about some of the rides that you took? We'll start out with that.
Sure, definitely. So while I was there, I actually took Uber, Juno, and Get. So three out of the five services, because there's actually also Lyft and Via, which is another service. So I didn't get to take every single one because I didn't want to spend my whole trip riding around in the backs of cars. But I wanted to get a few solid rides, or more than a few. But I wanted to get a bunch of rides in, talk to some drivers, and sort of see what it was like, just the experience in general with those three companies.
Well, did you get a chance to talk to the different drivers with the different services to see what how they feel about the service that they're driving for and the competing services?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, one thing that I found was really interesting is no matter which car I was getting into the back of, whether it was an Uber or a Juno or a Get, it was all felt exactly the same, right? All of these drivers are driving for multiple services. They're all the same types of drivers, the guys all look the same, you know what I mean? Like it really like each experience didn't feel like Juno was that different of an experience, even though, we've talked all about how Juno is different and better and all of that, right? But getting into the backs of these cars, it was really just which app did I use to call them? And that was like honestly what it felt like getting into the cars, difference. Obviously, once I started talking to them, there's a little bit different, but that was just an interesting kind of first observation for me, for sure.
Okay. Well, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, a smart driver is going to drive for every service that he or she can get approved for. That's just the best way to maximize your income. So as far as the different services, did you notice any major price differences between any of the three services, or quality of service, or the way the app was structured, or are they all pretty much identical?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say that kind of the biggest thing that stood out to me was when I was taking Juno rides. The first and foremost, Juno was, I think, 35% cheaper than Uber while I was there. And so you can imagine that that's pretty enticing for a lot of passengers. And I was pretty shocked. I mean, you kind of read about Juno and hear about it, and they are offering steep discounts to passengers. But I had a few friends in New York that I met up with, and a couple random people that I met up with, and a lot of passengers in New York have heard about Juno. I was like pretty pleasantly surprised. And then, of course, once I started getting into the backs of these Juno drivers' cars, I sort of eased into the conversation. And a lot of them weren't super talkative, to be honest, but they kind of told me the same thing over and over. They like Juno because they take much less of a commission, 10%. And I kept asking them, what does Uber take, right? And every driver actually had a different answer for me, but they all said, oh, 30, 32%, 35. It was usually in that 30 to 40% range. And so that was just sort of in their head. And, it definitely, drivers weren't trying to convince me on the spot to sign up. Well, because I was already in the back of a Juno. And out of all the Uber rides I took, no one tried to convince me to get into a Juno. But it was sort of like once you started asking about it, you could definitely tell that they enjoyed Juno.
Well, I'm really excited about Juno, and I've heard about them for quite a while now, and I've had a lot of people wanting me to start talking about Juno, but it's one of those things where rideshare companies come and go, and one day you may have one, the next day they may be gone, and another one is taking its place. So I kind of wanted to wait a little while before I started talking about Juno, and I'm really excited about it. Drivers seem to love it. The ones that are driving in New York City contact me through email, and they contact me on YouTube, and they tell me how great it is. But, that's great for them. The problem is that it's only in New York City right now. So I'm doing everything I can to spread the word and try to get them to a few other markets, but it seems to be a very slow moving process. As far as New York City goes, it's not as easy in New York City to drive for a rideshare company as it is in the majority of the company. I heard you mention before that there's all kinds of special licensing and permits that are involved. Can you tell us a little bit about what it takes to be a TNC driver in that market?
Yeah, definitely. And that's a good point. That's sort of why I say that, New York is really an atypical Uber X market because it's really the only place that requires full commercial insurance. So that's going to cost you $3,000 to $5,000 a year at least. And it also requires a TLC license, right? So basically, what you have to do is go and apply for the exact same license that taxi drivers have to do, pass all the same tests, do all the same, fingerprints and processes and background checks and all of that. And so you can imagine that someone getting into it as an individual driver, it's not really worth it to do 5 to 10 hours a week, right? If you're going to go through this whole process, pay for commercial insurance, get all the licensing and everything, you're probably going to be doing it 30, 40, 50 hours a week full time. And what we really see too is that a lot of drivers in New York actually go through fleet owners. So guys that own fleets of vehicles and they actually rent it out just like you would with a taxi, and they'll rent it out for $500 a week, and then you cover the 500 as a driver, and then you get to keep everything on top of it or something, some type of arrangement like that. So that's actually how the setup and how most drivers are doing it through that fleet owner type operation in New York.
Well, you'd almost have to do it that way because after you pay for all the licensing and insurance and everything, I imagine this isn't something that anybody off the street could just jump into.
Definitely. And I mean, even beyond the cost, it's just a hassle, right? Figuring out where to get commercial insurance. I get emails from drivers somewhat frequently in New York that are sort of looking into the process and wanting to do it on your own. It's really tough to figure it out on your own. You have to find an insurance broker, and sometimes you can find that through the Uber office. They'll connect you with a broker who obviously wants to get their cut, and then they connect you with a commercial insurance company, and then you're able to finally get commercial insurance and pay $3,000 to $5,000 or $6,000 a year, which is a lot more obviously than a personal insurance policy.
Well, what do you think the benefit would be in that market of driving for a TNC versus just driving a taxi cab? I mean, is there any benefit to it at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there may be some benefit in some of the scheduling. I think that as far as the number of rides, though, I think it's pretty equal. And that was one thing that I think New York has always been a little bit different because, frankly, like the taxi experience in New York has always been pretty good. It's so busy and there's so many people and it's so hectic. When you need a ride, it's honestly more of a hassle. And this is what I found while I was there. I mean, there were a couple times where we called for an Uber and he was going the wrong way on a one-way street. And he called us and asked us to come meet him because if he would have turned around, it would have taken him 10 or 15 minutes to turn around, which totally made sense. And we were totally willing to go do it. But after a certain point, I was just thinking to myself, man, it's probably easier just to hail a taxi. You walk out on the street and get a taxi. And in a lot of cases, taking the subway was faster and obviously significantly cheaper. So there's just all these different modes of transportation. And it's pretty interesting dynamics in New York for a passenger and driver. Getting around in New York in general is a lot different than I found. When I've gone to other cities like San Francisco, you can basically safely hop in an Uber, or LA. You might hit a little traffic here and there, but honestly, there are a lot of times where I found myself that it was going to be faster to walk or faster to take a subway than take an Uber. So it's definitely, I would say in that respect, it's impressive how much all these companies are growing. I mean, there's Uber, there's Lyft, there's Get, there's Via, there's Juno, right? There's all these companies and they're growing. And honestly, it's not that convenient to take rideshare services in the city. I think in the outer boroughs like Brooklyn and Queens. And that was one of the things. So I actually did meet with Uber while I was there and talked to them a little bit. And that was one of the things they told me is that they are growing significantly in places like Brooklyn and really expanding things like Uber Pool there, and where it's a little bit less dense and it kind of makes more sense.
Well, in contrast to New York, where do you think you'd prefer to live, California or New York, since you got to go up there and check it out?
I think that after spending a week in New York, it's a no-brainer for me. I'm California, born and raised.
I had a feeling you were going to say that because that's exactly where I would be too if I had a choice in the matter. Okay, well, I think that's just about it. Is there anything else that you'd like to add? Anything else you want to talk about?
Cool. No, I think that just about covers it. Short and sweet.
All right. Thank you, Harry. I appreciate you being here, guys. If you're not already subscribed, check out Harry Campbell, the Rideshare Guy. He's got a YouTube channel. He's got a very popular blog. Definitely check him out. He's got a lot of very good and useful information. So check him out, www.therideshareguy.com. And Harry, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me on, Randy.